Welcome to S142, Resource Management and Fiscal Stewardship. This is within the S100 Sustaining the Competitive Advantage course. In this lesson, you will study and discuss resource management concepts as they relate to managing unit budgets, organizations that support finance operations and fiscal stewardship at the Army and unit levels. This lesson links to Charlie 400 and Charlie 500 because fiscal resources are essential to any operation and must be planned and managed effectively. This lesson also incorporates critical thinking concepts from the C100 Foundations block. In class, you and your instructor may talk about this document. The AY24 President's Budget Highlights reflect the Biden administration's priorities of investing in the middle class, addressing climate change, and strengthening the economy. Outlined in this document, you may note the following initiatives. Increased funding for defense research and development. The budget proposes a 7.1% increase for defense research and development to $151 billion. Increased funding for military readiness. The budget proposes a 4.1% increase for military readiness to $277 billion. This increase is designed to support training, maintenance, and other activities that ensure the U.S. military is prepared to fight and win. Increased funding for military modernization. The budget proposes a 4.6% increase for military modernization, up to $276 billion. Increased funding for cybersecurity. The budget proposes a 6.1% increase for cybersecurity, up to $11 billion, and this increase will support efforts to protect the U.S. military from cyber threats. And increased funding for space operations. It's a 5.2% increase, bringing that up to $24.7 billion. So that supports the development and operation of new space capabilities, such as the Space Domain Awareness System. So why are you receiving a block of instruction on resource management and fiscal stewardship? Well, readiness is our top priority. The resource process is our Army's center of gravity. Without the right people, the proper equipment, and adequate dollars to support it all, our Army would not be able to fulfill its duty to the nation. It is everyone's responsibility to manage our resources across our formation responsibly. To help you understand what's required, we'll cover the following topics. So, the flow of funds, fiscal law areas, and the color of money. Two key systems, GCSS Army and GFIBS. We'll talk a little bit about Army financial operations units at the operational and tactical levels. We'll talk about managing a unit budget. We'll emphasize the importance of having the S4, S3, and S6 synchronized at the brigade level. And we'll talk about Army and unit fiscal stewardship. When Congress passes an appropriation, it places restrictions on the use of these funds. These restrictions include the purpose, time, and amount of the appropriation. Purpose. So Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the U.S. Constitution states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury except in consequence of appropriations made by law. This means that only Congress can determine the purposes for which public funds may be dispersed. The appropriations process is designed to ensure that public funds are used for the purposes intended by Congress. The purpose statute states that appropriations shall be applied only to the objects for which the appropriations were made, except as otherwise provided by law. Time. Most appropriations have a period of availability, which is the time during which the agency must obligate the funds. Agencies may not obligate funds before they are appropriated or received, and they must obligate all funds before they expire. There are rare statutory exceptions to these rules. Once an agency has obligated funds, it may disperse them before or after the period of availability ends, but before the appropriation closes. Appropriations close 5 years after they expire. Amount. The obligation and expenditure of appropriated funds must be within the amounts appropriated by Congress. The Anti-Deficiency Act, ADA, prohibits agencies from incurring obligations or making expenditures in excess of or in advance of appropriations. The ADA was enacted in response to various abuses, such as agencies incurring obligations in excess of their appropriations and then returning to Congress for appropriations to fund these coercive deficiencies. The Department of Defense has 5 major appropriations. Operations and Maintenance, O&M. O&M appropriations pay for the day-to-day expenses of DoD components, including training exercises, deployments, and military operations. O&M accounts may be replenished for specific operations through supplemental appropriations from Congress, reprogramming actions, or the United Nations. The Army's portion of this appropriation, OMA, is probably the most relevant for you at the brigade and battalion level. Military Personnel Army, MPA. MPA appropriations pay for the pay, allowances, and travel expenses of active duty Army personnel. MPA also pays for Class 1 support such as dining facilities and bottled water. Other Procurement Army, OPA. OPA appropriations pay for major end-item investments and table of authorization equipment to provide core capabilities to Army units. OPA funds are typically used for centrally managed items or systems that are considered investment items. Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, or RDT&E. RDT&E appropriations pay for the development and testing of new weapons, equipment, and materials. RDT&E funds are not typically used by deployed Army units unless they are involved in the research, development, acquisition, and testing process. MILCON. MILCON appropriations pay for the acquisition of land and construction of buildings for which authorizing legislation is required. Congressional oversight of MILCON is extensive, and specific approval is required for any project above an established dollar threshold. The term base budget. The base budget is simply the ongoing funding to keep a department functioning. This term is used by the U.S. federal government, businesses, and other organizations. The DoD starts with a base budget each year and then adds additional spending by exception for other contingencies. Take note, there is no longer a separate fund for overseas contingency operations called OCO. Now we have OOC, or Overseas Operations Cost. That's the new term, and since FY22, the President's budget request, since the FY22 President's budget request, this category is now included in the base request. So, the DoD's 5 major appropriations, often referred to as colors of money, are essential to its ability to carry out its mission. These appropriations are subject to strict congressional oversight, and we must carefully manage these resources to ensure that they are used efficiently and effectively. This slide explains how money flows from Congress to the unit level. So Congress passes the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, and Military Construction, or MILCON Act, which authorize military programs and spending. Congress also passes appropriations bills, which provide the funding for those programs. The President signs the NDAA, MILCON Act, and appropriations bills into law. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, apportions funds to federal departments, including the Department of Defense. DoD apportions funds to its service branches, i.e., the Army, Air Force, and Navy. The Department of the Army allocates funds to its Army commands, Army Service Component Commands, direct reporting units, and field operating agencies. This is a formal allocation, and these agencies cannot exceed their allocation at the end of the year, and doing so would violate the Anti-Deficiency Act. So let's look at FORSCOM. The money allocated to FORSCOM is formal. When FORSCOM, which is an Army command, allots funds to its subordinate units, these are informal allotments. FORSCOM informally allots money to its 3 core units. In turn, let's look at 3 core. 3 core allots funds to its divisions, which then allot funds to brigades, which then allot funds in turn to battalions. Informal allotments mean that if a battalion or brigade overspends its allocation, its higher headquarters can cover them by reallocating money within the brigade or brigade combat team. Now, this only works if the higher headquarters has money. So, if a battalion overspends, the BCT can cover them. But if the BCT is out of money, the battalion would have to go to the division for reallocation. So long as there is money available within the informal chain of command, the overspending or violation of the allotment is covered, and FORSCOM is not held responsible. At the end of the year, there's always money given to units to spend that is withheld by higher headquarters. These monies always belong to the unit. It doesn't come out of some magic pot of money. Take note that if units execute their budgets correctly, there shouldn't be a great deal of extra funds. However, end-of-the-year monies are often viewed in this manner. This use-or-lose mentality results in poor spending decisions and the mismanagement of taxpayer dollars. Take note of the roles and functions within the financial management community. Dispersing, banking, and payment support are functions that fall within finance operations. Resource management is a financial management function that provides advice and guidance to the commander to develop command resource requirements. This function resides in the S8 and G8. Accounting support is the accurate and complete recording of financial transactions, while internal controls are the policies and procedures used every day to ensure the Army achieves its planned objectives of effective and efficient operations, reliable financial reporting, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. The strategic support area extends from the JSA within a theater to CONUS or another combatant's AOR. It includes a vast array of DoD, government, and private sector agencies that participate in the sustainment enterprise. The JSA has a variety of finance core elements conducting operational and tactical level operations to support reception, staging, onward movement, and integration, that is RSO&I, operations. Finance core units embedded within ESCs and sustainment brigades provide finance support in the JSA to include procurement and dispersing operations. These elements also support RSO&I with local payment support and dispersing. The Financial Operations Center serves as the TSC's primary finance core integrator for current operations, future operations, and plans in coordination with the TSC SPO. Finance core units at the tactical level provide finance operations support to a brigade task force or equivalent sized units. Finance support teams, FSTs, provide mobile finance support to units across the battlefield. So let's shift gears and talk about budgeting. How does a unit spend money? Here's a list of areas that require constant monitoring. Units frequently order supplies. While orders might seem minor, collectively their impact is significant. Supplies range from general use to medical and maintenance needs. Important considerations include determining if supplies are genuinely needed or just stockpiled, sourcing from alternative locations like the base's DRMS, and ensuring prompt return of repair parts for credit. When it comes to travel, it's essential to manage TDY expenses efficiently. This includes reviewing car rentals, airfares, and other associated costs for the best value. For the few contracts a unit may handle, it's crucial to review contractor invoices, track government-owned property, and validate hours worked to ensure fiscal responsibility. While not a budget area, leaders should be attentive to the proper use, management, and oversight of government travel cards to prevent misuse, maintain operational readiness, and uphold the integrity of the service. GCSSA and GFIBs are Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP, tools essential for the Army's financial operations. They interface seamlessly, enhancing efficiency in funds and supply requisitions. This understanding is crucial for Army units to manage funds effectively and maintain accountability. GFIBs stands as the Army's primary financial, cost, and accounting system. It's a commercial off-the-shelf procurement rooted in the SAP Data Management Program, which is the backbone behind leading enterprises such as Microsoft and Walmart. So, who plays a part in this system? Well, the BCT S8 manages reporting and funds certification, and these requirements are created in GFIBs for things like GPCs, MIPRs, and contracts. GCSS Army allows units to execute supply and maintenance requisitions. So Class 2, 3, 8, 9 requirements, they all come through GCSS Army. GFIBs and GCSS Army interface through ZPARC. ZPARC is a control measure within the GCSS Army system that allows for two-person verification of requisitions that meet certain criteria. Someone in the unit, for example, the Battalion S4 or supply officer, will verify that the order is a valid requirement for the unit. Then someone in the S8 will verify that funds are sufficient for the order to be placed. As an organizational leader, it is important to know who in the unit are the approvers and the tracking mechanism for timely ZPARC approvals. The Brigade S8 is a primary staff officer who is usually rated by the XO and senior rated by the brigade commander. As the brigade's resource manager, the S8 advises the command team on financial matters, prepares financial reports, funds requisitions in GCSS Army, builds financial documents in GFIBs, and assists units with FOO and paying agent operations. The S8 doesn't set priorities, develop requirements, manage the GPC program, cancel requisitions, or maintain ownership of the budget. Commanders ultimately decide how to task the S8 to accomplish the mission. The S8 is much like an accountant in the business world. You want your accountant to track expenses and help you understand how your money is being spent. However, no business owner would expect or want his or her accountant to make decisions about business operations. The relationship between the S8, S3, and S4 is very important. The S8 funds validated requirements. The S3 and S4 validate the requirements through the chain of command. Budgets are updated in coordination with the training calendar. If there is an update to the calendar, the budget must follow. Holding periodic budget meetings is important to ensure that money is available for critical requirements throughout the year. This is why the S8 usually needs to be present at S3 and S4 meetings. The S8 monitors the unit spend plan. As staff members make recommendations about various unit priorities, The S8 provides updates on funds available and ensures that deobligations are executed. Here are some areas that previous ILE students have identified as things that may impact or drive unit costs. Cost drivers must be prioritized so that units can maximize training and readiness. Creating a 1 to N list of unit priorities is an important step in doing this. This is not an all-inclusive listing, so different units have different priorities, and mission requirements also influence what drives costs, especially when a unit is preparing to deploy. In contrast to the violations we talked about earlier regarding purpose, time, and amount, unauthorized commitments, UACs, are violations of procurement policy and process. A UAC is an agreement with a commercial vendor that is not binding solely because the government representative who made it lacked the authority to enter into that agreement on behalf of the government. UACs frequently occur when a member of the chain of command tells a contractor to do something that is outside the scope of their contract. For example, if contracted workers are hired to clean an office building, asking them to pick up trash around the building may constitute a UAC. In such cases, the individual who made this request could be held liable. Remember that only a warranted contracting officer, or KO, can obligate the government for commercial goods and services. Don't confuse this with what a field ordering officer or FOO does. A FOO has been delegated the contracting officer's authority to obligate the government for micro purchases of various supplies and limited services. This is very similar to how GPC cardholders operate. Unfunded requirements represent an opportunity for year-end purchases. UFers are above and beyond a unit's funding cap. To increase the likelihood of approval, make reasonable requests and have your requirements endorsed by the chain of command. Another key to getting UFers approved is managing a list of outstanding yet unfunded requirements throughout the year and not just late in the fourth quarter. It's not a bad idea to occasionally review your wish list during routine staff meetings. The XO, S4, S8, and most importantly the commander need to work together to support and validate UFers. So take the time to write clear, well-thought-out justifications that are tied to your command's mission, higher headquarters priorities, and readiness. At the brigade or battalion levels, you may be able to free up money for your own UFers by deobligating funds tied up in contracts, unsettled vouchers, and supply requisitions. Fiscal stewardship can be defined as the careful and responsible management of those resources entrusted to the government to execute responsible governance. To achieve this, we have standards, rules, and regulations to help optimize buying power for current and future operations. One aspect of fiscal stewardship is adhering to fiscal law regarding purpose, time, and amount, as discussed earlier. Leadership is required to provide oversight, prioritize readiness, and resist wasteful spending. We want to optimize buying power within the Army by effectively and efficiently obligating funds. Former Secretary of the Army Dr. Mark Esper directed the establishment of an Army-wide fiscal stewardship program to address the Army's historic deobligation trends and improve the optimization of its purchasing power. This led to the creation of the Command Accountability and Execution Review Program in August 2018. CARE addresses deobligations at multiple echelons with oversight and involvement of senior Army leaders at 3 levels: Enterprise, Headquarters DA, and Commands. Army leaders focus on 3 main problem areas in the near term: contracts, supplies, and transportation, as these are the largest OMA deobligations. The 3 levels correlate with the 3 venues, which feature quarterly or monthly reviews hosted or chaired by senior Army leaders such as the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff, and the AMC Commander. You'll recall from earlier when we discussed OMA, Operations and Maintenance Funding. This is the majority of the funding found at the battalion and brigade level. It is a 1-year appropriation with 5 expired years. The expired years make up the following 5 years past 30 September in which the funding that is obligated can disperse, that is, invoice. After the 5th year, obligations that haven't been dispersed are returned to the Treasury. They're canceled. On this CARE dashboard, look at the graph in the upper left. The Chief of Staff of the Army is briefed bi-weekly on this chart, and the bars represent the total spend plans for that month for the 4 major commands, FORSCOM, AMC, Army Futures Command, and TRADOC. The green line represents the actual obligations for that month for the 4 major commands. Here, the Chief of Staff evaluates whether the major commands are obligated to what they said they would, obligations to the spend plan, that is. The black line represents the total disbursements by month for each major command. Here, the Chief is evaluating the disbursements against obligations, that is the green line. The difference between the green line and the black line represents potential buying power. The goal is to bring the green and black lines closer. This is done by aggressively identifying transactions that have been finalized and still have obligations in excess of the disbursements. So, if the transactions have truly been completely dispersed, then a deobligation needs to occur so the funding can be reutilized in the current year. Every unit will have their own version of a budget cycle. A good field grade will be familiar with this cycle and know when and where to influence and manage the unit budget or coordinate with who does attend to ensure that your section or department needs are met. There are numerous reports to review, so get with your S8, G8, or RM and other field grades to know which ones and how to interpret these reports. A generic unit budget cycle is shown on this slide, and management of this cycle and the funds increases your fiscal stewardship efficiency. Obligations occur when the government enters into a legally binding agreement to pay for a good or service, that is, contract awards, approved TDY authorizations, or approved supply requisitions. Deobligations occur when the actual cost of a requirement is less than the amount that the unit set aside for the requirement due to quotes and estimates. Note the differences between these TDY authorizations and the total amount dispersed on the vouchers. Deobligations occur throughout the fiscal year, and returning funding to the unit enables them to use it for other purposes. However, OMA appropriated funds may only be used for new obligations within their period of availability, which is 1 fiscal year. Deobligations after the 30th of September occur the next fiscal year. So this canceled requisition needs to be deobligated to free up these funds. If this isn't done by 30 September, these funds are not going to be available for new obligations in the current fiscal year. While they may be used to make adjustments to the existing obligations that occurred during the previous fiscal year, they largely lose their ability and do not represent buying power for the unit for current requirements. So in other words, you still have to pay your bills, but if you don't do it before the fiscal year is over, you lose that possibility. So let's look at the service contract down here. The service contract is completed, but there's still $10K that must be deobligated or the unit will no longer be able to use these funds. Let's see, this results, if you add it all up, there's $26,000 that could potentially be lost if the monies authorized aren't deobligated and spent on other requirements before the new fiscal year. So when your unit makes obligations in the current fiscal year and these obligations close out after crossing into the next fiscal year for less than the amount that they were quoted for, you have effectively lost buying power that could have been used for training and other unit priorities. Okay, pause here and take a moment to think about some of the factors that go into successful unit level stewardship. As a professional, organizational level leader, you need to spread the good word about fiscal stewardship. After all, optimizing your unit's purchasing power supports readiness. Okay, in this video, we've covered a lot of ground. This video was intended to supplement your readings, but it is not a replacement for them. So be sure to take the time to review these topics presented today thoroughly. So we discussed funding, the flow of funding, fiscal law, colors of money. We talked about GCSS Army and GFIBs. We talked about some finance core units on the battlefield. We talked about managing a unit budget, what goes into that. The importance of the S4, S3, and S8 getting together and synchronizing their efforts. And Army and unit fiscal stewardship. And then there was something called CARE, too, so don't forget about that. All right, thanks for your time.